Hello and happy Sunday.
Well, happy Sunday to you.
Yours was noticeably less enthusiastic than mine.
No, mellow. It was oat milk latte.
Okay, all right. I was a double espresso.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Two Mats regular Sunday morning Q&A podcast brought to you by the New European. First question.
Is it possible for a party to win too big a majority? From Leah in Kensington. Well, what a good question.
I think it is, isn't it? Probably. I mean, let's work backwards from what the Tories are now sort of threatening.
What you mean?
Absolute single-party socialist state. That's not a good thing. So,
yeah.
You know.
I mean, I suppose what I'm supposed to say, right, as a responsible political commentator is the nation needs a decent opposition. Okay, right?
Yeah,
So having said that, I dug around a bit on this and did you know that after the October 1931 general election, the national government, this was early Ramsay MacDonald, had a 492-seat majority?
No.
Now, it only lasted, only last few months. But I feel that was quite.
What, did he go back to the country for a
extra
mandate?
Well, as you can, it was a coalition, so it doesn't really count. Whig government of 1832 defeated the Tories by 225 majority. And of course, Tony Blair, famously in 1997, had a 179-seat majority.
It's weird, isn't it? Because all of those, like the previous ones, and this may come across as I'm being critical of Labour, but I'm not really. But assuming Keir Starmer gets a massive majority, it's not really because of Keir Starmer. It's because of 14 years of absolute decrepitude from the Tories.
We live in it's funny because we talk all the time about divisiveness and polarisation and so on, and atomization and cantonization, and rightly so, because they all apply. But right now, the country is as united as I can remember it being, in its absolute, unvarnished determination just to get them out.
Yes.
And so this is why I assume the origins of Leah's question is Grant Shapps saying that it would be dangerous to give the Labour Party a supermajority, which is, I suppose when you think about it, an incredibly, it's what the Americans would call playing defence.
Is supermajority a new name? Of which Grant Shapps is brilliant at coming up with new names, isn't he? As we know.
That's a very good point, actually. Yes, of course. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. I think yes, it is. I think he just means too big a majority. Yeah. And I suppose the sensible and Keir Starmer-ish answer would be that we don't want a country that has 600 Labour MPs. Yeah. But I'm afraid, look, it's impossible to forecast because actually constituencies are so tightly geared that you never end up with quite what you think you're going to get. But if we do end up with a huge Labour majority, it will be because the country wanted it, and that you can't get away from that. And
I'm hoping that, as we've discussed previously, I'm hoping that we get a Lib Dem opposition. I know it's unlikely, but I think it would be a really good thing.
I think there are a few variables in this election. It seems to me. Yeah. One of them is the scale of the majority, and the other is who comes second. And I don't see why your Lib Dem idea is wrong. Yeah. I think what is true is that turn the question round and say, if he does get a huge majority, he's got to do something with it.
Yes.
He cannot have a 200-seat majority and say, steady as she goes.
Exactly right. Yeah.
On Europe and other things.
Because it's never going to get better than that for him.
The one thing we've learned the one thing he has shown par excellence is that politics today is unbelievably volatile. He took a smoking ruin in 2020 that had its worst election results since 1935, and he's brought it to the point where the Tories are warning the public not to have too big a Labour majority. Yeah. Now that, of course, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the MAGA. You've got to watch out.
Yeah, absolutely. Leah, great question. Thank you so much. Next question, please.
This is from Lewis Naylor, age 17. Thank you, Lewis, for sending a question. I'm a massive fan of the podcast. Thank you.
Good man.
Whilst I understand why the main parties have been avoiding Brexit, I don't understand why there were no questions about it in either of the debates. There are surely millions of people who want Brexit to become part of the conversation. So why have the BBC and ITV decided not to include a question about it, Matt?
Well, I think firstly to say, I think there was a question at the Sky debate from a member of the audience, a woman who who I thought articulated the problem very clearly, which is to Lewis's point, why is no one talking about this enormous factor in our nation's future?
Correct.
Why is no one talking about it? Well, we know why no one's talking about it, because both Labour and the Conservatives, and also I think to a lesser degree the Liberal Democrats and even the Greens, they're all couching their opinion on Brexit because they want to avoid being labelled enemies of the people. They want to avoid being
saboteurs.
Yes, of offending the red wall, of imploding their electoral chances by invoking the ire of the Daily Mail. And I think to a degree that same fear is extended to the BBC and the ITV. It's too hot a potato to handle, which is, of course, a criminal neglect.
Well, it particularly because it pervades every subject they're actually talking about, growth and so forth. A very interesting phrase, which I hope is dispensed with quickly. Peter Mandelson wrote a piece in The Guardian last week. I think it was The Guardian, perhaps The Times. Actually, I think it was The Times. And he referred to the permanent handicap of Brexit. Well, I don't like the sound of that.
No.
Who says it's permanent?
Yeah.
I mean, they're not the founding fathers.
No, and the people, if you are worried about the people and what they think, 60, 70% of people firstly think it's been an absolute car crash. Well, who are the other 30%?
Yes.
But an equal number would quite happily rejoin or certainly have a referendum.
Yes, and it was not the first, and I hope not. I certainly hope not the last referendum on EU membership.
Yeah, and I think if Lewis is thinking that this silence is permanent, I don't think it can possibly be. I think it's got to come back. It is an elephant in the room, and it has to come back. On the agenda. It has
to come back. If only, I hope it comes back for reasons of honesty, but it will have to come back for reasons of practicality.
Yeah,
because as we've been hearing last week at the Labour manifesto launch, they're betting the farm on growth.
Yeah.
Well, good luck getting that growth outside the single market.
That's right. And also, what will happen is there will be a huge influx of new MPs who will be younger, will feel less beholden and bothered about the historic legacy of the omerta around Brexit.
Yes.
And will be saying, do you know what? I think Brexit was always a bad idea. It sucks, and we maybe should be thinking about a new way. As those people grow in influence and power within the party, that might become policy.
Yes, and I think there will become people who talk, that cohort you talked about, Matt, will talk about joining rather than rejoining.
Yeah, absolutely.
They'll just say, why are we outside the EU? Isn't it time we joined?
Yeah. Lewis, thanks. Certainly not the first time we've talked about Brexit, nor the last, but great question. Question now from SA801.
An interesting suggestive name.
Must be a pain in the arse every time you book a restaurant table and your name.
Sorry, what was that, sir?
Reform is not a political party. They say it's a private company. They may well get a few seats in these elections. Is there different status and advantage to them, or a disadvantage? Interesting question.
It is a very interesting question. It's a limited company actually. With I think Farage is listed as the principal majority shareholder. It's a fascinating model, this, because obviously it has extreme limitations, because whatever you think of parties and their kind of foibles, they are machines for campaigning, and not just that, they're for sort of inherited memory, for ethos. The weight, the heft of a party is very important. But I do find reform interesting. I mean, it's sort of horribly interesting on all sorts of levels. And one of the things is that, in contrast to a lot of right-wing conservatives, Farage is not interested in party democracy. He's got a company.
Yeah.
And party democracy, where the members select the leader, has been very bad for the main parties. We think that the Tories chose Duncan Smith over Ken Clarke. They chose Liz Truss. They chose Jeremy Corbyn twice in the Labour Party. I can't remember who it was. There's an American political scientist who said democracy should happen between parties, not within them. Well, I think that's an exaggeration. You've got to have some democracy. But there is an element of cunning in this, which is Farage understands that we live in a world of networks, not institutions. And so he's just invented reform as the latest vehicle. Now, I don't think that's sustainable, actually. but it's an option now.
What happens then? So if it's a limited company and it has shareholders, which it is, and they're getting inbound revenue from donations,
yes,
presumably they're paying salaries to themselves. Nigel Farage presumably is taking a salary from this company out of those donations. A brand is being created that will have power, it'll have a value, won't it, to somebody somewhere?
Yes.
Can they sell the company to someone?
Well, because I'm sure that the business of standing for office through the Electoral Commission limits your options in a huge number of ways. But this, I hadn't thought of this until this very moment, actually, but it's yet another reason to update the Electoral Commission and the law that governs it, which was passed in 2000.
Yeah.
Because I suspect this will not be the last private company political party.
Well, if there's any constitutional experts out there or tax
we'd
affair
love
experts,
to hear.
love to
Exactly.
know what is the thinking, I wonder. I'm sure it's not entirely innocent, given the parties involved.
No, it's not. It's definitely not innocent.
Right, next question, please. Thank you, SA801.
Isn't Macron's hasty call for an election, this was in the wake of the European elections, also reminiscent of Cameron's launching the Brexit referendum, trying to control the right by democratic means alone? Susie via Spotify.
Well, it is probably quite analogous, isn't it? Because
it's a very interesting comparison, actually.
It feels like a party political move, and potentially at the expense of the nation. Because if this one backfires, then it'll be every bit as calamitous as Brexit was for Britain.
Yeah, it will,
and really, you would have to say that Macron's rolled the dice, wouldn't you?
At minimum. I mean, I think in the end, you have to defeat the right by democratic means. I mean, I think that has to happen.
Yeah.
But I think you also have to have developed and got into the system an aggressive argument first. Yeah. And why this symmetry is an interesting one is that what was wrong with the Brexit referendum, amongst many other things, was that it was the wrong means of defeating the right, and the campaign was terrible. It was just terrible.
Yeah.
And what worries me about what Macron has done is that although it's an election for the National Assembly in France, it's the same thing, which is basically Macron saying, I'm brilliant. Either we'll win because I'm brilliant, or we'll lose and Jordan Bardella or Marine Le Pen will become prime minister. Yeah. And here's the really stupid bit: they'll be so terrible that the French people will come crawling back to me in 2027 in the presidential elections and say we've had
enough of those idiots. You were right all along.
Yeah. And as we've seen in this country, those kind of plans don't always go to well. I mean, it's worth mentioning again. Here we are, America. The Biden campaign keeps on telling the American electorate the economy is brilliant and that they should recognize how brilliant it is. We're, I think, we are 2 weeks on from Trump's conviction on 34 felony counts, and the polls are not changing.
Yeah,
he's still slightly ahead. So you're playing with fire in these things.
Yeah, definitely. And it's also a bit worrying that there's only a couple of weeks, really, isn't it? Is it June the 30th? Is that the first of the polls? Have I got that wrong, or is it July the 30th?
Oh, the Macron. Yeah.
I mean, so it's not like he's going to be able to embark on a nationwide
no, not at all.
mind-changing exercise. So if they're riding high, there's every chance that they'll get in.
And, I mean, he's risking embarrassment in front of the world as Paris hosts the Olympics. It's a very strange thing.
Right. Susie, thank you. Great question. Next question, please. Alan N. Are we going to get a 2-match seat prediction prior to the election? I hope so. We did one a while ago, didn't we? But I'd like to revise mine.
Because I went for 100+ majority and you went for 60+.
I think I'd like to up mine a little bit.
Yep, it goes.
higher.
Yeah, me too, actually. I think I'm now sort of even conservatively going for 130. What about you?
I'm going to go all the way to 150.
Way.
Yeah, big.
You've done the crossover.
We thought about we've got an edition coming out on election morning.
Yeah.
And so we did joke that we could do two front pages like Labour win big, and on the other cover, the alternative cover would say Labour win really big.
Scotcho. Yes, I mean I a lot, I think. I don't think it's going to be one of those elections where when the exit polls are announced at 10 o'clock, we'll go, oh.
Can you imagine, though? Imagine
Well, I mean, it has crossed my mind,
if there's a
actually.
sort of Brexit referendum moment.
If there's...
Who'll be making the announcements? Obviously not Hugh Edwards. David Dimbleby is...
I think Hugh Edwards will not be making the announcement to the nation, yes, wherever he is that night. So... Well, Channel 4 have got this lineup, haven't they? They've got Emily Maitlis and Rory Stewart
and Alistair Campbell
and
as
Alice,
well,
our friend and colleague, and but I don't know who's anchoring. I think Christian Gurumurthy is doing the Channel 4. I think Laura Koonsberg is doing maybe Clive Myrie as well.
Maybe so. I don't know who
so
will
it'll be one of them.
Intone the exit poll.
But they'll say 10 o'clock bong, and then they'll go straight to the
Rishi Sunak has
pulled
off
the cadaverous. The features of John Curtis, as he says, a man who is unable of saying a sentence without a concessive clause. Or he's like a weather forecaster, although on the one hand, this has been a tremendously bad day for Hiroshima, the weather was nice. They always qualify at pollsters. It drives me up the wall. But I do think it's a bracing image, isn't it? Of we're all sitting there thinking, going to be 150 or is it going to be 100? And on they come to the exit polls. It's pointing to a hung parliament.
It's really conservative.
And you just see this, this kind of Rishi Sunak pogoing up and down at the count in Richmond,
Yeah. My God, it'd be amazing.
It would be interesting in a very...
Somewhat unlikely, though.
Somewhat unlikely, but you never... Right. Yes.
Okay. Who would have thought we'd be fantasising about a Tory victory on July the 4th, but we're not really. Thank you, Alan.
Actually, if Rishi... Just a final thought. If you think about what comes into your head when you think of the word insufferable, right?
Imagine that.
I don't know what it is, right? We all have... It's all different and yet the same. If Rishi Sunak were to pull off the least likely victory in the history of politics, the pictorial dictionary would have to replace whatever's there by insufferable.
He would levitate behind that podium.
I think
almost to the point where you could see his chin.
It would be historic in a way that doesn't bear thinking about.
Thank you, Alan. Great question. We enjoyed that one. John H. asks, given the state of politics over the last 5 years, I am starting to believe we have slipped into an episode of The Thick of It. If Sunak was a character, do you think he would be believable? Or would we think nobody can be this shite at politics?
It's a really interesting question because, I was sorry that it stopped with season 4 because I thought it was magic. Although probably all these things, they should kind of stop before they get over familiar. And so much was Malcolm Tucker, the driving force, that once he left the stage at the end of season 4, it was hard to see it going on. It sort of ended at the end of the coalition with a David Miliband-esque figure, Dan Miller, taking over from Rebecca Front's Nicola Murray as leading the opposition, and Malcolm being arrested, I think.
That's right, yeah.
But, I think Amanda Iannucci actually did write a kind of satirical poem about Boris Johnson and the pandemic called Pandemonium, which is very funny. So obviously his sort of creative juices are still going on it. I would have loved to have seen a sort of Sunak adjacent character because there's so. But John's point is right, isn't it? Because the real Sunak is already in the thick of it.
It's beyond satirization.
With his Instagram account and his Bluetooth mug and his cashmere
he's
hoodie.
waving his contactless card at the machine. Borrowing someone's car.
Maybe he is beyond parody.
Can you imagine Malcolm, though, with Paul Brand?
Paul
fucking Brand!
So...
He's done what?
What you're saying to me is that you left the D-Day celebrations and centenarians to come home for Paul Brand, who is less than the dust from my skin. It would be brilliant. And also, do you remember the fucker that played by Tom Hollander, who was the Conservative? He only appeared at the end, and I think only in a couple of episodes, maybe only one, but he was... I think slightly inspired by Andy Coulson, but imagine a psychotic Andy Coulson.
Right.
He was called the fucker, and you never heard what. And he was the hard guy of the Tories, and he was played by Tom Hollander. And he said to all the Tory aides and special advisors, "What I really want to do is shoot you, but I can't because it's illegal. It's one of the great lines. But the fucker would have been great on Sunak coming back early.
Superb.
Who wouldn't?
My favourite Tom Hollander story is the day in the life he did. I think it was for the Sunday Times. And he just says, 2/3 of the way through, on a Sunday morning, I might sit down and enjoy breakfast, go for a cycle, or masturbate.
He's a very funny
Fair
man.
enough. Thank you, John, for that question. Right, last question. Ties are 30 from Cardiff. Do you want to read this? Or?
After Rishi Sunak's saying he was denied Sky TV as a kid, here's the joke that keeps on giving that, isn't it? Yeah. I'm curious to know what the two Matts went without in their own childhoods. Well,
yeah. What did you go without?
You know what? I think pretty much nothing, in the sense that now, being a bit earnest, if you've grown up with food on the table and a roof over your head and loving parents and a bit of that, you're not really, I wasn't allowed a PlayStation or something. There's nothing I went without. I was incredibly lucky.
I agree with that. That said, I did want a chopper bike when I was a kid, and I never got one.
Well, you see, the chopper bike thing is very interesting, because if we go down that route, of course, we'd be here all day, right? One of my favourite fictional characters. You're much more grown up than me, but I still read Viz, right? I look forward to Viz arriving every whatever it is, month or whatever. And Spoiled Bastard is one of my favourite characters that is inked in Viz. And there is no real complexity to Spoiled Bastard. The clue is in the name. He's a sort of sailor suit wearing 5 or 6 year old who's just horrific to his mother for not getting exactly the right thing.
Yeah.
And the final frame is always something terrible happening to Spoiled Bastard.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that a bit. I mean, I think children are there to be spoilt, and it's wonderful if you can. And I think that people who whinge about their childhoods, without cause. I mean, if people who really have had a
deprived
childhood, that's not whinging. That's just saying it how it is.
Yeah.
But I have, and we did this on the Friday podcast. The Sunak talking about the terrible sacrifice of not having Sky TV, or as I believe sociologists call it, cable channels insecurity. Just kind of begged the question, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I always think when people say, what did you do without? Well, it's a bit of a nonsense question, because what it means is that you went with something else. That's all. You didn't have Sky TV. You did something else. You watched something else. I mean, none of us experienced, well, I say none of us, you and I, Rishi Sunak, let's keep it to the three of us, experienced
We're
anything.
A trio often spoken of in the same breath.
That you could complain about legitimately in later life.
No, and when you hear actually about, and oddly enough, sometimes you don't really find out the truth about people until middle age. Actually, how indigent or unsettled an upbringing people had, and you really realise that's something to say was tough.
Yes.
But saying you didn't get a Batmobile for Christmas or an action man with the clinging grip and all
that's
that,
right. That's right.
Not saying.
Well, as did Dylan Jones, who we had on Friday's podcast, he had a tough childhood.
He had a very tough childhood, and I think that's absolutely fine. But I think the idea that it's absolutely essential for everyone to claim that they,
suffered.
Well, they
endured,
grew up in a shoebox on the M25.
Yeah.
It's, as I said, when it's true, then it's part of your story. But it really isn't true of a lot of people.
Do you know, I remember when I was at school, must have been about 12 or 13. There were 2 school trips that were going round on. There was a skiing trip. Must have been in the Easter or something like this. And there was a walking trip to the Peak District. And I remember taking the 2 forms home to my mum and dad and saying, can I go skiing?
Yeah.
And I remember my dad saying, well, let's see,
Yeah.
And then coming back and saying, look, we haven't got enough money for that, but you can go on the walking trip.
Yeah.
I remember it was 60 quid or something like that for a week's walking in the Peak District. And I had these kind of boyhood fantasies about going skiing, waxing my ski, whatever it felt like, And I went on the walking trip instead, and I kind of definitely felt like it was second best. But it was one of the best weeks of my life. It was absolutely transformative, and I've loved walk. It's been a huge part of my life ever since. So imagine if I had gone on that bloody skiing trip, you know.
Yeah.
It's like Steve Jobs. I'm not comparing myself to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs walking past the calligraphy class at Stanford and popping in and seeing it.
Yeah.
And suddenly that becoming a driving force of typography on Apple Macs.
His entire life, yeah.
You know, so
shaped by it.
Yeah, who knows which way we turn, as Robert Frost would say, you know, take the path less trod.
An extremely beautiful way to end the programme.
Should we end it at that point before I go completely off the rails?
No, it's wonderful. I'd like a bit of poetry on a Sunday.
Brilliant. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please get in your feedback or any questions to the 2 Matts at tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS, at tnepublishing.com. Don't forget your subscription offer to the New European. Trust me, it's the best rate you can get. And if you like this kind of podcast, you will love getting the New European through your letterbox every single week.
It's better than Viz. That's how good it is.
Is it better than Viz? Would you say so?
It is better than Viz.
Less
I'm
funny.
sorry, Viz, but it is.
The letters are less funny, I have to say. But that aside, it's better than Viz. So get your subscription, join the crew. We'd love to have you on board. And thank you to Rethink Audio, led by Matt Hill, as ever. And until
enjoy your
Monday,
Sunday. Have a wonderful time.
See you tomorrow afternoon.